Thank you for joining us. Today we're doing myth busting part 2. So this hive here had a bad case of Chalkbrood, which is a fungus that is the bees, as they're in their pupation phase, actually get this fungus all over them and it kills the larvae and it turns into what looks like a little piece of chalk, hence the name Chalkbrood. Have a look at this. In the tray down the bottom, we've got a lot of Chalkbrood, and I mean a lot. This is what's falling green at the bottom of the hive. So this hive really does have a bad case of Chalkbrood and it hasn't gone away. So what we did is we put banana skins into this hive. Now, it might be a myth or it might be true, but some people swear by putting bananas inside the hive turns the bees into a state where they clean all of the Chalkbrood out. Others believe that it releases some type of gas which actually helps kill that fungus in the hive. So whatever it is, let's see whether it has actually worked. It's been about a month now. The bananas have been in here. That's what this piece is about. It's just a frame called an eek that I made out of an inner cover, and the bananas are then on top of the brood frames. So let's see whether it's myth or not. If you've got experience with this or you have an idea about this, put it in the comments below. Also put your questions in about flow hives, about beekeeping, and we'll get to answering those after we've had a good look at what's going on in this hive to see whether the banana thing is a myth or not. Okay, we've got our smoker. We're smoking the front of the hive. Calm those bees down a bit. If you're new to beekeeping, make sure you're protecting yourself. Get a good bee suit or a good bee jacket, wear your pants, wear your gloves. Okay, I'm going to do this up and then we're going to take off the top box and have a look at what's happened to those bananas. Okay, so we'll get this roof off. There we go. Then I'm going to leave the inner cover on. There's no need for me to take that off. Get my hive tool. I'm going to separate the two boxes here just by going around to each corner. So there we go. So we were in here relatively recently putting our bananas in. The bees haven't actually glued it up too much, so we can probably find this box quite easily pulls off. Now with the flow hive, the rear door here is the handle for the sideways direction. It's a nice generous handle, much easier than a normal beehive handle. So what you want to do, sometimes it's quite heavy, is just rock it back towards you like this, keeping the weight in the sideways direction. If you're going this way, it's harder. You're better off beside the hive like this, and then you can simply just rock it back. Now this is pretty light, showing the bees aren't doing too well. The numbers are dropping. I'm just going to put this on its end in front of the hive here, like that. And we can lift up this excluder and it looks like the bees have chewed up all of the bananas. If you watched the previous episode going back a month where we put the bananas right in here, I can just see the remains of the skins. Now the bees aren't too happy about me in here just now, so I'm going to add a little smoke to my hands to mask my own pheromone. There we go, and to Jai behind the camera. And then adding a little bit here as well. That's interesting. As we smoke it, the bees are clearing out of the way and we can see the remains of the banana skins they've actually used as bracing to build some comb on. Check this out. Along here, they've bridged down from the banana skin to the top of the comb and turned that into one piece of comb. And over here, they've used that shape and just built comb off it. It's quite amazing. Bees will use whatever space they've got to create comb. They don't necessarily do perfect matrices of hexagons. They'll even do other shapes, squares, ovals, all sorts of things. Okay. So what we need to do to know whether this banana technique has worked for this hive is pull out some brood frames, have a look and see whether or not there actually is chalkbrood still in the frames. We've seen that it's in the tray, so we know they've been busy cleaning it out, but we don't know whether it's still persistent in the frames or not. So we can take off this next level. Now it would be nice to have our little frame rests at this point. So, have we got any shelf brackets there, Trace? We can clip onto the side of the hive here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just gently pick apart the comb that's joining the frames together to give us access to pull one of these frames out. And what I'm doing is looking in to see which frame is going to come out nice and easily. It looks like this one. You want to choose one that's not doesn't have any bridges going between the combs, so it's easier to get out. Here we go. A couple of shelf brackets on the side of the hive make a nice frame rest, like that. And like that, and that way when we pull out the frame we can just rest it there. So it's a nice dual purpose instrument, that shelf bracket we use for harvesting. Now, adding a little bit more smoke here, going to take away the joining bits between the frames, the pieces of banana skin that are left, and then go sideways a little bit just by putting the hive tool down between to loosen up the propolis and beeswax that they join frames together with. You can add a bit of smoke down between the frame. There's less bees when you pull that frame up. That way you're less likely to roll bees as you lift the frame out. Using the J under the end bar against the other frame, we're just lifting it up like this, nice and gentle. Moment of truth here, everyone. Is it myth or does it work? Is there chalkbrood still in the frames? And oh dear, it looks like for this hive it has not worked. We've got plenty of chalkbrood in this area here, showing that this hive is in trouble with chalkbrood. So, according to this scientific test of one, the chalkbrood banana thing is a myth. So there we go. If you've got a different opinion on that, you've got different results, please chime in. But this is a bad case of chalkbrood. It's only much worse since we put the bananas in. So the test of one says bananas make chalkbrood worse. But, of course.
Did you try ladyfinger bananas, Cedar?
Oh, we did. We had a mixture of both. We did Cavendish, we did ladyfinger, so we weren't going to take any chances with this one. One thing we did that got a bit of comment was we left banana inside the banana skin. So we just sliced the bananas down lengthways, we laid them on top of the frames. That's what some people say to do. Others say just the skins, not the bananas. And watching the bees when we put the bananas in with the banana inside, the bees actually thought it was a tasty meal and they were into the banana themselves. So perhaps it's better without the banana in there. But as you can see, we've got a terrible case of chalkbrood. Let's just have another look at that. You can see the mummies down the cells. So if you have an issue with chalkbrood that's bad like this, you've already moved the hive into the sun, the next thing to do, well, there's a few next things to do, but one of them is to change the genetics of the hive, and hopefully next time you get more hygienic genetics that can clear out the chalkbrood. Other things you can do is start getting rid of the old combs that have the pathogen load in them. So what we might like to do is shift this comb to the outer edge, wait for the brood to hatch, and then actually get rid of the wax that's in here and let them go again nice and fresh.
Oh, look at this, Cedar.
there's one that they're just pulling out of a cell, and interesting that it's white and black. Now white is the mummy stage, the black is when it's actually spilling spores out into the hive. So this hive isn't doing very well with it. Ideally they get it out before it turns black and starts sporing more chalkbrood into the hive. Okay, while I'm in here, because this hive isn't doing so well, I'm also looking for signs of sunken dark capping with piercings in it to see if there's any issues with AFB or EFB in the hive. So important to check, especially when you see this kind of erratic pattern like this. But it looks to me like this is a case of chalkbrood, and I can't see any AFB there, but good idea to go through all the combs to check. Okay. Well, there we go. Any questions coming in, Trace?
Yeah, well there is, and there's a few little funny things, of course, because as Chuck says, if you'd split this hive, would it be called a banana split?
Banana split.
So this is the banana split hive. See, the sort of people are noticing, like, it looks like a healthy hive, and it looks like there's heaps of bees. Do you think it can just right itself?
Look, it can, and it often does. Really healthy numbers are often the cure to a lot of things, because they can get on top of it and do the work needed in a hive in order to get things right again. Now, what I'm looking at here is this hive is a bit down on numbers, even though you see lots here. If you swing the camera around and have a look at this first hive in the row over here, have a look at the bee numbers present at the front of that. There's a lot of bees there. So when you've got a bunch of hives, you can start benchmarking what's going on. Now that hive has got heaps of bees right at the entrance, showing us what a really healthy colony looks like at this time, in this environment, in this location. Now that's doing well. So if we want to get this poor chalkbrood infested hive back to looking like that, we're going to need to make some changes. We're going to need to get in here, cut out some of that old infected comb, and introduce some new genetics with a new queen into the hive. And what we'll probably see is a turnaround, the chalkbrood getting ejected before it goes through its spore stage, and the hive coming back to full health again. So interesting, I've never done the banana experiment before, but there we go. And it didn't work for this hive. Now, interesting thing about beekeeping, there's a lot of things that are scientifically proven, but there's a whole lot in beekeeping that isn't. And it tends to get perpetuated through the beekeeping circles, because for that person who tried it, it worked for them in that location at that time. Now, it could be these bees that aren't responding well to banana skins, but perhaps most other bees do. So we don't know for sure with a test like this, but what we do know is it didn't work for this hive. But try it, see if it works for you.
Cedar, with there are a few questions coming in. One is, do you think obviously we've had a lot of rain here, do you think that's had any effect on chalkbrood? And also, do you think some of the other hives might have it, and would you inspect all the other hives?
A good idea to inspect all the other hives to check on chalkbrood. Now, it's a fairly common thing that you'll see around, and the bees usually get on top of it, certainly in this area anyway. But yeah, good idea to make sure that it's not spreading around your apiary, and try not to mix up the frames between this hive and other hives and so on, because we don't want to spread the pathogens around if we can help it. Look at this beautiful bee here with the big pollen bags on its back legs. Can you see that? Give us a thumbs up if you can see these big orange balls on the back hind legs of this bee here, just in front of my finger. It's very cool. Beautiful orange pollen they're bringing in to make their bee bread. Soon that bee will be getting it off those hind legs and poking it down a cell, adding some special sauce with its enzymes, topping it with honey to make a nice fermented bee bread, just like sourdough. And you can see, you might be able to see just down here, if we get the right lighting, all the colours of the different pollen in the bottom of the cells. Now, this hive looks like it could do with cycling out some of the frames. So you can see here that this has been used many times for brood. The cell walls are getting really thick, getting really dark, pathogen load increases. Good idea to move that out towards the edges, wait for the brood to hatch, and then you can chop that right out and put the frame back in towards the centre. Okay. Any more questions? Put them in the
Cedar,
comments below.
all the debris that's in the bottom of that tray, what will you do with it?
So, best idea if you can is throw it in a fireplace, because you don't really want to spread that around for other bees to potentially pick up those spores and bring them back into other hives. Okay. Let's just keep looking through this hive to see what we can see. Now, if they didn't have so many Chalkbrood cells, you can see this hive would be quite healthy because their numbers are okay, even with so many larvae not making it. So it's a bit of a shame. She's a good layer and all, but just doesn't have the genetics to clean the house properly. Okay. Here we go. Another frame. Lots of pollen up here. You can see in this area. Beautiful. Pollen down the cells, some glistening honey as well. Very nice.
Fantastic. Cedar, there's someone's saying, I've heard that lemongrass maybe works. Maybe that's another myth buster we're going to have to try.
Okay, keep the ideas coming in. If you've got ideas of what to do, then we can test things here at Myth Busting Flow Hive TV. And you know, it's really interesting as a community, because we've got, you know, flow hives in 130 different countries and so many hives all around the world. We can actually together as a community do some citizen science and really find out whether some of these things that are said to work really do work or not.
That is such a great idea. Cedar, James is asking, if you take a super off a weak hive, can you put the same super on another hive that is strong and ready to go?
Look, you certainly can, but before you do that, make sure you get in there and check for pathogen issues. But it is common for beekeepers to move equipment from hive to hive, but when they do that, they do know that if they do have some issues with disease, that that could pass over to the other hives. So it's best to keep the equipment separate if you can, but it's also quite common for beekeepers to mix and match equipment between colonies, but at a commercial level they usually keep the hives in groups. So if they get an outbreak of AFB or something, then they might have 20 hives over here, another 20 over there, and so on. So it's isolated to that group.
But Cedar, Nathan's saying lives in upstate New York and noticed yesterday the bees were bringing in blue pollen. Where would bees get blue pollen from?
Oh wow, blue pollen must come from some nice flowers that have shining blue pollen grains. So around here we do see blue pollen, but it's pretty rare. So it'd be nice to see some blue pollen coming in. We mostly get oranges and yellows and whites and those kind of tones.
Cedar, there's people tuning in now a little bit later wanting to know again, what makes the Chalkbrood? Why has this hive got Chalkbrood?
So Chalkbrood is a fungus that the bees actually can collect off flowers, off leaves, off wherever they're going in the environment, and bring that back into the hive. Now, what happens is it gets into the young larvae, and the larvae, when it's partway through its pupation, actually turns into a chalky little lump instead of going through its metamorphosis. So it's a sad thing that bee just does not make it through to the cocoon stage. The bees then typically start pulling that out, and you can see in the tray below, which we haven't cleaned out since we did the last experiment because I wanted to show you what it looked like. Look at all of those Chalkbrood mummies that are in the hive that have been ejected through the screen at the bottom. Look at that. So good idea to clean them out though, because once they've turned from white to black, they're starting to release spores that could come up into the hive again. So part of the management of this chalkbrood would be to clean that often, put those in a fireplace and cut out some of the old comb and introduce new genetics by introducing new queens. So we'll follow along with this hive. Hopefully we can get it right and get rid of the chalkbrood issue.
So does chalkbrood a notifiable disease? Do you have to let authorities know that you've got chalkbrood?
It's not. Whereas AFB is. So if you find AFB, you do need to notify, and it's a good idea to, if you notice by putting a stick down the cell and you get the stringy, gooey bit coming out, you'll need to put that on a slide and send it away to get verification that that is the issue. And yes, then it's a notifiable thing.
Cedar, you mentioned blue pollen before, but we've actually had a customer email in recently saying they have blue honey.
Blue honey? No way. Now that would be an interesting one to follow up. I have seen some pretty wild things where there was blue honey and bright red honey and all of these crazy colours coming in, and it turned out the bees were foraging on the waste from a local M&M's factory. And they were going, nice sugar, this is going great. But of course it had all of the colouring in there, and they were bringing that back into the hive. So the beekeepers were wondering what on earth was going on, but it turned out to be food dye. But blue honey, chime in if you know anything more about blue honey in the world. Perhaps there's flowers with nectar that's tainted blue and they're condensing it into a nice blue looking honey.
Well, Down Under is saying might be stealing someone's jelly crystals. Blue jelly.
Jai's pointed out that I haven't zipped up my jacket properly. Getting a bit complacent. Okay, good. Now, what I might do is clean off the bananas off the top of the frame, and we'll start putting this hive back together again. But keep those questions coming in as we go. For those that are just tuning in, we were checking in to see if the banana thing, by putting banana skins or chopped bananas in the hive in this case, actually helped to get rid of chalkbrood. And the answer here was a clear no.
Cedar, earlier you mentioned the shape of honeycomb cells. Why do they often build hexagons?
So if you've got an area, hexagon is the pattern that uses up the least wall area to fill that space. So let's say if they decided to do round, then there's all of this extra bit you'd have to fill in the corners. If you decided to do triangles, there'd be a lot more wall section for a given number of cells. If you decided to do squares, there's a lot more wall section. So it's clever because that's the least use of wax for the given amount of storage. Also, hexagons have a lot of strength to the pattern as well. So sometimes they're hanging 3, 4, 5 kilograms off that hexagon matrix, and you imagine the load on the cells up the top, and they have to handle that. So bees are amazing little engineers.
Cedar, just a little bit of understanding the chalkbrood. Chuck's just wondering, so are you saying that hives can recover from the chalkbrood on their own, or is the queen's genetic a factor?
They can and they do recover on their own. So often beekeepers will do all sorts of things, but the hive actually just got on top of it on its own. And the best thing is a really strong colony, and they're much more likely to get on top of it. But if they're not getting on top of it, then you need to change something. And typically a new queen is the way to go, because that introduces new genetics into the hive.
Well, everyone's very keen to spot that
Okay.
queen.
If you can see a queen, let us know.
And Cedar, if you don't spot the queen, can you tell from what you're looking at that there perhaps is a queen in this hive, or?
Absolutely. So I'm not particularly looking for the queen. If I was going through a re-queening exercise, then I definitely would be having a good look at each comb, moving through systematically looking for the queen. But I know she's in here laying because I can see young larvae down the cells, and brood as well.
Cedar, is this a question
Wow,
coming in?
look at that one. It's got an issue
Oh.
with its wing.
Ooh.
What's going on there? Haven't seen that one before. It's got some sort of, if anyone knows what that is, let me know. It's like it's got something on its wing. It's probably banana.
Do you think the honey's going to taste like banana?
Well, I guess it could. I mean, bananas release that interesting banana smell that permeates through your whole kitchen when you have bananas getting overripe in the corner. So there is a chance that the honey might smell like banana. You can see some nice big teddy bear looking drones here. Drones are good ones to pick up because they don't have a stinger. So if you're going to pick up a bee, I'm doing this one-handed, then pick up a drone and, you know, the kids can play with that. You can see their eyes are joined together in the centre and they're a bit more teddy bear in shape. And, you know, there's no danger of getting stung by a drone.
Is there a season where drones fly out of the hive more often to make different things?
Absolutely. So bees typically build up in a springtime and that's when a lot of mating goes on. So the queen actually chooses whether she's laying a egg that she's going to fertilise or not. So if she fertilises it, it turns into a worker bee. If she doesn't, it turns into a drone, a male bee. And that means that it will have completely different genetic traits, well, same genetic traits, but a completely different expression of it. And it's the same genetic traits from the queen, right? But then it doesn't have the influence of the drone she's mated with. And that means that drone's not going to do any foraging, it's not going to do much work around the hive that we know of. It just is going to hang around, eat honey, and hopefully mate with a queen one day when it goes off on one of its flights in search of a queen. It'll congregate in a drone congregation area with a whole bunch of other drones, just waiting and hoping that a queen will fly by.
Cedar, James is asking, must be from maybe around here, wondering if you can tell a bit about the mites that are about when the bangalow palms flower.
The mites?
Yeah, do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about bangalow palm mites. If you do, please chime in. So we've got some nice honey here. We're getting some interesting organic shapes here with a naturally drawn comb. A few holes that they've left right through the comb, that's okay. If you use foundation, you won't see that. So this might be a good frame to put back towards the centre because it's relative, hasn't been used for brood so much. So we could move that in now and shuffle some frames around, being mindful to make sure no frames are going to be touching each other. Because we want to cycle out some of that old pathogen laid Chalkbrood comb, we're going to put it over near the edge and let it emerge. That one too, that could be a great one to go back towards the middle. The bees will then move that honey and it gives fresh new wax for the queen to lay her eggs in, and it won't have so much issues with the Chalkbrood spores.
Cedar, when you lifted off the super before, you said it was really light and there wasn't much going on. Will you put the super back on, or would it help to not have it on to try and get this colony a bit healthier? Or
I think it's still our autumn here and it's still quite warm, so there's no issues with the size of the hive making it harder for the bees. So because I don't just want to take this off and leave it around for no reason, because then, you know, vermin get in and wax moth, whatever, and it's harder to clean up, I'm just going to leave it on the hive in this case. If the colony was much smaller, I might consider taking it off and nursing the hive back to health in a single brood box or even a nucleus box.
Cedar, Debbie's asking in Bega here in Australia, will the queen bee mate with a drone that she has laid, or will she recognise that it is her son?
Well, bees are clever. They know not to do too much inbreeding. And what they'll do is all of the drones from all of these hives and any other hives in the surrounding area will take off and gather in a drone congregation area. They typically like a bit of open space, like a football field at the bottom of the valley or something like that, and they'll wait for a virgin queen to take her mating flight. And as soon as she gets in with cooee, there'll be a lot of drones after her, and she might mate with up to 30 on that mating flight. Each one will get its genitals ripped off, and that'll be the end of that life for the drone. She'll return to the hive with enough sperm for up to 6 years of laying. She might do another flight if she hasn't got quite enough, or she might not. But once she's done those mating flights in the first week or so of her life as a queen in the hive, then that's it. So the genetic material, to answer the question, is coming from all sorts of hives around the area.
Cedar, we've got a little bit of a shout out here. Chuck, who's our ambassador, who just he's got some new beekeepers and wanted you to do a big hello to April and Petra, who have just got their first classic hive and live about 10 k's down the road from him, and they're going to keep us posted on what's happening with their new beekeeping journey.
Fantastic, April and Petra, well done. It's a fascinating journey to start on, and it gets a little bit addictive, I have to say, just staring in at this world and watching what the bees do, and then if you get a good season, the extraordinary honey you get to harvest as well. So best of luck with your first hive.
Fantastic. Oh, James is saying about that the bangalow palms, that they come from the flowering palms and disappear when the palms stop flowering.
Okay.
Yeah. So don't know much about that.
I don't know about the bangalow palm mite. Certainly I know when the bangalow palms flower, which if you swing the camera around, point it up that way, you can see some beautiful flowers. A bit to your right, Jai, the other palms.
Oh, over there. Ah.
You can see flowers, and when they get going and start producing nectar, it is loud. There's bees, native bees, all sorts of bees will come to those palms.
So Cedar, what's your sort of top tips for people who are wanting to get started on this fantastic, hobby or project of beekeeping?
My top tips would be, don't hold back, but get yourself some education. So there's different types of people in the world. Some people will research for years, read all the books they can find, do hands-on courses, do online courses, do all of this stuff, and eventually get going. And that's fantastic if that's the way you do it. And other people just get the equipment and learn as they go. Now, I'm actually the latter. I jump into things and I learn as I go, and that's just how I am. But the main thing is that you are learning. What you don't want to do is jump in and not learn and do nothing, because that'll end up in a disappointing experience, and at worst you could have some disease issues that spread. So you do need to know about how to look after your brood nest, and we have a great online course at thebeekeeper.org if you want to have a look at that. Also a great fundraiser that we're planting 1 million trees from this year, so we're very excited about that online course. Experts from all over the world have put great training videos in there, so it's not just the local knowledge from here. But there's also other online courses and hands-on courses that you can do. And another great thing to do is find somebody that's kept bees before, hopefully local to you, that can give you a hand, so that if this feels a bit too daunting to you, and some people aren't daunted by learning online and then having a go, but other people are. And sometimes it's a case of just, even if you have a person that's done some beekeeping before, even if they're not that experienced, it's nice to have somebody else with you when you're first doing your brood inspections. And another top tip I would say is, when your hive's small, get in there and get comfortable with doing brood inspections like this. If you wait till the colony's really big and there's heavy boxes on there, it'll be a harder task for you to get comfortable with beekeeping. We find that people who start small and build up get much more comfortable with doing their brood inspections than people who buy a hive that's already going and have to tackle it when it's a much bigger hive for their first beekeeping experiences. Okay, what I'm going to do is start getting these old dark ones and putting them back towards the centre. Now this one's a nice fresh looking one as well. It's a really nice light comb. So I'm going to put that over in the centre as well. So we've put all the fresh looking combs in the centre, and we've got 3 that are sort of more dark and old that were in the centre. And we're doing that because we want to then, next time we come in here, cycle out or cut out that comb to remove the pathogen load, remove some of those chalkbrood issues, and that'll help this hive. Now, what I'm going to do is just check that there isn't comb that's touching each other. One thing when you do decide to move the frames around, if you have to, is you don't want comb from this one touching comb from that one when you press the frames back together. Reason being is the bees can't service the area where 2 combs are meeting. It'll take them a while to chew that away and reform it. And in that time, things like the hive beetle, which are prevalent in this area, can get in there, take the opportune moment to lay their eggs, and it can be the start of a real hive beetle slime out issue. So just make sure, if you are moving the frames around, have a good look, make sure the wax comb part isn't pressing into another wax comb part. And if so, you can even just with your hive tool chip some of it away if you need to. And that way the bees can get straight in there and service that area too. Okay, let's put this back together now.
Cedar, Corey's purchased a classic hive, and just wondering any recommendations for anti-ant features that they could use to stop the ants getting into their hive.
Okay, ants are a cosmetic issue, but they are a bit annoying for us humans when we open the observation windows and it's all full of ants and ant eggs. So a few things you can do. One is you can just brush them away a few times, and sometimes that's enough and they'll move to a new home. But another one is you can throw some cinnamon powder behind there. So brush them away, some cinnamon powder, you might have to do that a couple of times, and that can get rid of the ants. But you do end up with this cinnamon powder, which has a sort of a brown earthy look, which you might want to clean off again later on your observation window. It's typically the rear one where the ants are most interested. There's more of a gap there, and there's a little bit of honey there as well for those ants. Another thing you can do is create a ant barrier just by putting your hive up on any kind of stand. It could be some bricks, and those bricks could be in some trays with some water. If you've got our Flow Hive 2, or Flow Hive 2 Plus, it comes with these, the Flow Hive 2 doesn't, the Flow Hive 2 Plus does, with these ant guards down the bottom. Of course, they only work if you've cleared the foliage away from the hive, and then you can fill them with a bit of oil or grease and create an ant barrier right on the leg of the hive.
Can you use the new base here with the classic hive?
You can. That is available, and Trace can help you with that if you phone into the office.
Absolutely. I think they're even in stock, which is pretty good. We like that.
Okay, looking through here, having another quick look at everything as we put things back. So that comb is quite old and dark. We'll put that one on the edge. Now I'm going to make enough space for a second one there. Just by picking up the comb, having another look at this. But we're going to have to schedule a new queen for this hive. And hopefully that will fix our chalkbrood issues. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions.
Oh, great, Cedar. This is actually coming on both, because we obviously do this every Wednesday morning, and we do it on YouTube and Facebook, and there's 2 questions coming in similar. I think it's people who realise that the Flow Hive has flow frames, but the box you're looking at, it's like, is this part of the Flow Hive or is this a traditional hive? So,
okay, so a Flow Hive is a conventional Langstroth hive down the bottom. So wood and wax, we like to keep it perfectly natural with the bees and let the bees draw their natural comb without even any wire running through it. Reason being is we don't need to actually spin these combs in a centrifuge, so they don't need that wire reinforcing. And when you let the bees naturally draw it, it's less work for you putting in that foundation. But It's a little bit more work inside the hive, just making sure they don't go wonky. So these are all naturally drawn combs. The bees have done a great job of keeping them nice and straight, and we haven't had to put any foundation wax, any wire or any plastic foundation in here. So that's the way we like to do it, but conventionally most beekeepers like to do wax and wire foundation because those frames might end up in the centrifuge and they'll need some reinforcement when they're spun at high speed in a centrifuge in conventional harvesting techniques. Because we're not doing that, I find it easier to go for naturally drawn comb. Said to have health benefits for the bees too, because they can size the cells just how they like. And I think it's great. Other people do a mix. They might put a few foundation sheets in there just to give them the right idea to keep them straight. It's up to you. Try and see what works for you.
Great. How old is this hive, Cedar?
So this hive, it's a good question. There's some notes written on the inside, but I've just put the frames back.
It's probably one that we've moved over from the other house, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. So this hive would be a few years old, I guess. Looking at the comb, it's definitely a few years old. This has all been through multiple seasons, perhaps 3. This one I'm holding. Time to cycle that comb out. Okay, I'm just gently nestling these frames back in. Our smoke has gone out, which is typical when you stand around talking too much. But the bees are being cooperative. Don't really need any smoke at this point. Okay, I'm just pressing the frames together, which is what you need to do to make sure they don't go wonky. Leave any excess space on both sides. You'll notice that flow hive boxes compared to conventional ones are a bit generous with the amount of space in the hive, which you'll think is too generous in the beginning if you're a conventional beekeeper, but over time you'll really start to appreciate the extra space. As you can see, as things build up a little bit, then there becomes not that much space on the edge, which is about right for manipulating the comb and taking that first frame out. Okay, so next, it would be good to have a bit of smoke actually, because if I smoke here, I can chip away this bit of wax, which what I can do is just fill this smoker up again by opening it up, and you can see it's probably, hopefully still glowing red in there. So in this case I'm putting some pine needles in, just like this. Be careful, the smoker can get hot.
What's the best kind of smoker fuel, Cedar?
Wear your gloves. The best kind of smoker fuel is the one you can get hold of, in my opinion. So I just use whatever I've got around. There's some pine trees over there, so I grab some pine needles. Often I'll use the garden mulch for mulching the garden with, but that was all wet today. So I elected for some pine needles, and that should get going with a few good puffs, and that'll help us just clear the bees off the frames. So any dry leaves or bark from trees or anything like that is good. If you've got opinions on what the best smoker fuel is, lots of beekeepers have a lot of opinions about almost everything, chime in, let us know what works best for you. So look at that, a little bit of smoke like that, and the bees just cleared right off the top of that frame, which is a very handy thing to be able to do when you need to scrape some wax off the top of the frame. And we do need to do that because we put the bananas in here. For those of those tuning in, that would have sounded funny, but we did have bananas in here testing out the Chalkbrood myth. Now, that's meant they've built a whole lot of wax here, and to get the excluder back in place, we're going to have to scrape some of that wax off. So, a little bit of smoke, stop talking, start working, and we can get that wax off. Now, if it's got any honey in it, you do need to make sure you take that away and not leave that out for other bees to come and forage on, because that will spread pathogens around. Okay. So being nice and patient as you scrape along, giving the time for bees to get out of the way. I don't need to make it whistle clean, but some beekeepers like to just get it right back to wood. Others just leave a bit of wax there. It's up to you. Here we go. Scraping off a bit of old banana there. Good, good. Out of the way. There we go. We've got time for another question or two, Trace.
Okay, great. This is a good one. Mrs. Molina in New South Wales here. Just wondering, Cedar, what your thoughts are about needing to keep logs or records if you've only got one hive, and do you have to register if you only have one hive?
The answer is yes, you do need to register. There's a small fee to pay, and that helps with helping keep Australia, in our case, this depends where you are in the world, but in Australia and many other countries, you register that you are a beekeeper, you pay a small contribution to help keep pests and diseases out of beekeeping. And the services that you can access, like posting away slides of AFB slime and things like that, which is a great service so you can know what's going on in your hive, and also other information that's important will come through once you've registered. So we do have a reminder email if you're one of our customers to do that. And in terms of keeping logs, that's also an important thing to do. So just write down what's going on and in your hive, and it's good practice even if you only have one hive. And then once you have multiple hives, because bees have a habit of breeding up, you'll be in good practice to know what's going on if you start to take a split from this hive to that hive and so on, and you'll be able to track where equipment went.
Thanks, Cedar. And look, Karen's just asking, you were talking about before about when you cycle out the frames. What do you do with the frames that you cycle out?
Okay, so if they're just all honey and it's nice, then they've stored a lot of honey in it, then you can chop out some of that comb and take it to your next gathering, and it'll create great conversation, and there'll be different flavours throughout the one honeycomb, and it'll be a nice thing. If it's just empty and just an old brown comb, in this case full of Chalkbrood pathogens, then that'll just go in the fireplace. Okay. Great fire starter, old wax.
Oh. And then you can burn your Chalkbrood at the same time.
Okay. Got any more questions as we put this hive back together?
Well, of course, it always comes up, Cedar, because of course you are often beekeeping without gloves on, and people just are like, why don't you get stung? Everyone's saying, I'm always getting stung, I'm getting stung. You don't seem to get stung on your hands.
It really depends on the genetics of your hive, and also you do learn how to not get stung as well. For instance, I'm very careful not to put my finger right on a bee when I'm lifting up a comb. That's a typical place where you get stung when you're gloveless, is you put your finger on a bee and it freaks out and stings you. Now, if this was a hive that was aggressive, they'd be banging into me like this and crashing into my veil and whatnot. And in that case, I would give them a lot more smoke, and I'd probably reach for my gloves, put my gloves on, and continue beekeeping. Now, if you've got hives like that that are aggressive and they're hard to work because they keep stinging you and so on, then the best fix for that is to replace the queen with some known genetics of a queen breeder. A month later, you'll have a completely different temperament like this, where they're nice and cool, calm, collected bees, easy to pull apart and do a show and tell with. Okay, the queen excluder's going back on now. I'm just going to shake some bees off that. There we go. Going to scrape a little more of the wax off that. Put that one back in place like this. And there's not many bees up there right now, so I'm going to seize the moment just to put this Flow Hive Super back on. It's not very heavy. If it is heavy, get some help. Okay, there's a few bees just around the lip there though. So what I'll need to do is get the smoker onto that just to get the bees off that area. Or you can brush them off with a bit of foliage. That's also a good way. Or a bee brush if you have one. I find foliage to be quite useful because it's disposable, not sharing pathogens between hives. You get all the bees off that rim there, and then we're good to go. Put that right back on. Okay, now lining it up is a good thing to do. Try and get all the parts in line. like that. And there we have it. We can put the roof back on, the panels back on. Thanks very much for tuning in. If you missed it, the outcome was in this hive, in this location, the banana thing, putting banana skins or banana in the beehive did not work to solve the chalkbrood problems. If you've got any ideas on what else we can do myth busting on, just let me know. Thanks again for all your great questions. Let us know what you'd like us to cover, and do tell us if you'd like us to do some more myth busting.